For our final talk, we have Simone Browne from the University of Texas at Austin. Thanks, Simone.
Good morning. So a quick Google image search of the term artificial intelligence, we come up with photos of humanoids like this, iRobot-looking images of white plastic faces that seemingly stare out into the distance, into nowhere. But these representational practices are important for how artificial intelligence is marketed and imagined and sold to the public. But in the 1930s, a curious link was made between robots, an electrical company named Westinghouse, minstrel imagery, and the history of black people's labor in the United States. Designed by Philip Thomas and Samuel Kintner from Westinghouse Research Laboratories, this robot, sometimes called Mr. Rastus robot, sometimes called the Mechanical Slave, and sometimes called the Mechanical Negro, had dark rubber skin, was dressed in denim overalls, and wore a checked bandana around his neck. An aesthetic gesture, perhaps, to the southern working-class African-American farmers, as both raw denim and checked cotton have a history of being labeled as Negro cloth, or an apparel of enslaved people who were required to wear nothing finer. Negro cloth laws in this way sought to establish a sartorial link between those that can labor unfreely and those that can wear finery. So Mr. Rastus, the Mechanical Negro, was a black robot that was introduced around the time of the Great Depression, invoked perhaps to soothe concerns around robots replacing human workers. But unlike Westinghouse's other robots of the time, this robot was a symbol of black servitude. And the racial meanings attached to this mechanical slave, as Louis Chude Soki notes in his book, The Sound of Culture, was perhaps to lessen the fear of the uncanny that these technologies represented. So when this realistic mechanical Negro first appeared at the National Electric and Light Association conference in San Francisco in 1930, it was kind of as a sideshow. It was part of Westinghouse's robots as marketing strategy for its various household technologies and other innovations. Rastus could bow, say a few pre-recorded words, and he had one major trick. He was made to enact the legend of William Tell. His inventor would aim an arrow at an apple that was sat upon his head, and a light that was at the end of the arrow would activate a photoelectric cell in Mr. Rastus's eye, and the apple would explode. It was quite a violent display. So the name Rastus is part of this roster of depictions of blackness that are often exaggerated representation that took the shape of figurines, kitchen utensils, postcards, lawn ornaments, and that also adorned the boxes of the instant food industry. And these exaggerated representational practices work to rationalize the economic exploitation of black domestic workers, as well as those who labored in low-paying conditions in the service sector. So Rastus, the mechanical slave, is one story, an old story, but one of many that can get us to think about what the afterlife of slavery can teach us about artificial intelligence and our inhumane presence. Oh, sorry, I meant to say inhuman. So, there is seemingly a certain historical continuity when it comes to what data becomes training data and who is in the room overseeing that training. For example, with this case that I'm sure that you all know about from 2015. So 2 points to wrap up. First, we must contend with our historical presence. And second, these technologies are not infallible. For example, the case of pattern and object recognition or determination. With the case of whistleblower Ronaldo Chavez of the Albuquerque PD, who testified in a sworn affidavit for a case that there are back doors, that these patterns and objects can be manipulated. He had testified that using Axiom's evidence.com storage of police camera footage, that he was able to, change perhaps a pen into a knife, or basically Photoshop items that come from a police camera footage. And so I would just leave with this question to close as what are our alternatives when these possibilities are there, and that we have to contend with our historical present. Thank you.